An elderly man lived under the care of his son, especially because he had Alzheimer's. One day, without realizing it, the elderly man opened the gate for a stray pit bull. The dog, which initially seemed frightening, would unknowingly help heal the family. When two thieves tried to break into the house, everyone almost fainted at what happened. Before hearing this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Before you hear this heartwarming story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The shrill sound of the alarm clock cut through the silence of the early morning, yanking Jack out of a restless sleep filled with worries. With a muffled groan, he reached out to silence the device, his eyes still heavy with fatigue. It was 5:30 a.m., and another challenging day awaited him. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Jack rubbed his face, trying to shake off the last vestiges of sleep. His thoughts immediately turned to his father, Frank, sleeping in the room next door. The routine of the past few months weighed on his shoulders like an invisible but inescapable burden. Rising with a sigh, Jack walked silently to Frank's room. He opened the door slowly, avoiding making any noise that might disturb his father's sleep. The soft light filtering through the cracks in the curtain revealed Frank's fragile figure, a man who had once been strong and vibrant, now reduced to a shadow of his former self by the relentless march of Alzheimer's. Jack observed his father for a few moments, his heart heavy with a mixture of love and sadness. Frank slept peacefully, oblivious to the worries plaguing his son. Carefully, Jack adjusted the blanket over his father's shoulders and left the room, gently closing the door behind him. In the kitchen, while preparing a strong coffee, Jack let his mind wander to the events that had brought him here. Just a year ago, his life had been completely different. He had been working as an engineer at a promising company, dating Sarah, a dedicated doctor, and planning to buy his own apartment. Everything changed when he received that fateful call from his Aunt Martha. "Jack, your father, he's not well. I think we need to talk in person." Aunt Martha's words still echoed in his mind, bringing with them a wave of conflicting emotions. That same night, he discovered that Frank had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. The news hit like lightning, shaking the foundations of his carefully planned life. Without hesitation, Jack made the decision that would change the course of his existence. He quit his promising job and ended his relationship with Sarah to devote himself entirely to caring for his father. It was a difficult choice, but for him, the only possible one. Frank had always been his hero, his safe harbor. Now it was Jack's turn to repay all the love and care he had received throughout his life. The aroma of coffee filled the kitchen, bringing Jack back to the present. He looked at the clock. 6:15. Soon he would need to wake Frank, help him with his morning hygiene, and prepare breakfast. Then he would have to rush to his new job as a substitute teacher at a local school, a job that, although less prestigious and lucrative than his former position as an engineer, offered the flexibility necessary to care for his father. As he sipped his coffee, Jack absent-mindedly flipped through a photo album he always left on the kitchen table. It was a tactic he had developed to help Frank remember important moments in his life. The images captured instances of happiness, young Frank smiling beside his wife on their wedding day, Jack as a baby in the arms of his proud father, family vacations at the beach. One photo in particular caught Jack's attention. In it, Frank, then in his 50s, held a fishing trophy, his face radiant with joy. That image belonged to a not-so-distant past, but now seemed to belong to another life. Jack felt a lump in his throat thinking about how things had changed so drastically in such a short time. The sound of hesitant footsteps in the hallway snapped Jack out of his reflections. Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway, his grey hair disheveled and a confused expression on his face. "Good morning, Dad," Jack said, forcing a smile. "You're up early today, huh?" Frank looked around, seeming disoriented. Where am I?" Jack's heart tightened. It was moments like these that made his new reality so painful. "You're at home, Dad? In our kitchen. Want some coffee?" Slowly, recognition seemed to dawn in Frank's eyes. "Ah, yes, sure, son, coffee would be great." Jack gently guided his father to the table, helping him sit down. As he prepared a cup of coffee with milk for Frank, he couldn't help but notice how the roles had reversed. Now it was he who cared, who protected, who worried. "Look at this photo, Dad," Jack said, pointing to the image of the fishing trophy. "Remember that day? You caught a huge bass." Frank leaned over the album, his eyes gaining a spark of interest. For a moment, Jack saw a glimpse of the father he had known, strong, confident, full of life. "Ah yes, that fish gave me a run for my money, but I didn't give up. I never give up, you know." Jack smiled genuinely this time. "That's right, Dad, you never give up." The rest of the morning unfolded in its usual routine. Jack helped Frank with his bath, getting dressed and taking his medications. Each task was performed with patience and love, although fatigue began to weigh on his shoulders. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Johnson, the trusted neighbor who stayed with Frank during the mornings while Jack worked. "Good morning, Jack," she greeted with a warm smile. "How are things today?" "Good morning, Mrs. Johnson. We're managing," Jack replied, trying to sound optimistic. "Dad had a good night. Breakfast is on the table, and his lunchtime meds are sorted in the little box." As he prepared to leave, Jack felt a pang of guilt. Part of him wanted to stay, spend more time with his father, make sure everything would be okay. But he knew he needed to work, keep the house running, ensure they could pay the bills and Frank's treatments. "Bye, Dad," said Jack, hugging Frank. "I'll be back soon, okay? Mrs. Johnson will stay here with you." Frank nodded, his eyes momentarily clouded by confusion. "You'll really come back?" The question, so innocent and yet so laden with fear, broke Jack's heart. "Of course I will, Dad. I always come back, I promise." With one last look at Frank, Jack left the house, his chest heavy with the responsibility and love he carried. As he walked to the bus stop, he reflected on how much his life had changed and the challenges that were still to come. What Jack didn't know was that soon, an unexpected event would completely transform the dynamics of his family, an unforeseen arrival that would bring not only new challenges, but also a ray of hope amid the darkness that seemed to envelop his life. But for now he moved forward, one day at a time, guided by unconditional love for his father and the determination to face any obstacle that fate might put in his path. The afternoon sun was already leaning on the horizon when Jack finally arrived home. Exhausted after a day full of hectic classes and endless meetings at school, he longed for a few moments of tranquility. However, he knew his journey was far from over. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Johnson," he greeted as he entered, forcing a smile despite the evident fatigue on his face. "How was the day?" The grey-haired lady rose from the living room armchair, where she had been crocheting. "Oh, Jack, it was a quiet day. Your father is in his room taking a little nap. He took all his medicines properly and even ate well at lunch." Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Quiet days were becoming increasingly rare, and he appreciated each one of them. "That's good, Mrs. Johnson. I don't know what I'd do without you." After saying goodbye to the neighbor, Jack walked quietly to his father's room. He paused at the door, observing Frank's sleeping figure. Even in sleep, the lines of worry and confusion never completely left the elderly man's face. With a sigh, Jack retreated to the kitchen. As he prepared a quick snack, his mind wandered to the events of the day. The classes had been particularly challenging, with restless students and a growing pile of papers to grade. Still, he felt grateful to have found this job that allowed him to be home every afternoon with his father. The sound of shuffling footsteps in the hallway announced that Frank had woken up. Jack immediately dropped what he was doing and went to meet his father. "Hi, Dad, did you sleep well?" Frank looked at his son, his eyes clouded for a moment, before a flash of recognition appeared. "Jack, you're back from work already?" "Yes, Dad. I got back a little while ago. Want some coffee?" As he prepared coffee for both of them, Jack observed his father out of the corner of his eye. Frank seemed more lucid today, which was always a cause for joy. These moments of clarity were precious, islands of normality in an ocean of confusion. Seated at the kitchen table, father and son enjoyed a rare moment of peace. Jack took the opportunity to tell about his day at school, the students' antics, the small victories in the classroom. Frank listened attentively, occasionally asking questions or making comments that demonstrated that, at least for now, he was fully present. "So you know, son," Frank began, his voice laden with emotion, "I know it can't be easy for you, taking care of me, working. Sometimes I remember how things were before, and—" Jack reached out, holding his father's hand. "Dad, don't worry about that. I'm here because I want to be. You always took care of me, now it's my turn to give back." Frank's eyes filled with tears. "You're a good son, Jack. I'm proud of you." Those words, so simple and yet so powerful, hit Jack like lightning. All the exhaustion, all the frustration accumulated over the past months seemed to dissipate for an instant. At that moment, he knew that all the sacrifices were worth it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a comfortable routine. Jack helped his father with memory exercises recommended by the doctor. They read the day's newspaper together and watched a nature documentary on TV. It was almost possible to forget, for a few moments, the shadow of the disease that loomed over them. At night, after helping Frank prepare for bed, Jack finally had a moment to himself. Sitting on the house's porch, he contemplated the stars, allowing himself for the first time that day to truly feel the weight of his reality. His thoughts wandered to Sarah, his ex-girlfriend. He wondered what she was doing now, if she thought of him sometimes. The decision to end the relationship to dedicate himself to his father had been one of the hardest of his life, but Jack knew he couldn't have done differently. A distant bark caught his attention, bringing him back to the present. Jack looked at the deserted street, noticing a skinny dog hurrying past on the sidewalk. For a moment, he felt a pang of empathy for the lonely animal, recognizing in it a reflection of his own loneliness. Sighing, Jack stood up to go inside. It was time to try to get some sleep before the new day arrived with its challenges. As he closed the porch door, however, he couldn't help but feel that something was about to change. It was just a hunch, an indefinable sensation at the back of his mind, but it was there. The next morning, Jack woke to the familiar sound of the alarm clock. The routine repeated itself. Get up, check on his father, prepare breakfast. But there was something different in the air, an energy he couldn't explain. While helping Frank get dressed, Jack noticed that his father seemed more agitated than usual. His eyes constantly wandered to the window, as if looking for something. "Everything okay, Dad? Are you looking for something?" Frank frowned, confused. "I don't know. It seems like there's someone out there. I heard a strange noise during the night." Jack tried to calm his father, attributing the agitation to a dream or a momentary confusion. However, when he opened the living room curtains, he was surprised by the scene he found. There, in the small front yard, was a dog. It wasn't the skinny stray Jack had seen the night before, but a robust grey pit bull. The animal stared fixedly at the window, as if waiting for something or someone. "Dad, are you seeing this?" Jack asked, incredulous. Frank approached the window, his eyes lighting up with a curiosity Jack hadn't seen in a long time. "A dog. He looks lost, son." Jack hesitated, torn between concern for his father's safety and compassion for the animal that clearly needed help. "Stay here, Dad. I'll see what's going on." Cautiously, Jack opened the front door. The pit bull, upon seeing him, began to wag its tail, its posture visibly relaxing. There was no collar or any visible identification. "Hey, buddy," Jack called softly, extending his hand. "Where did you come from?" To his surprise, the dog approached, sniffing his hand before sitting down, looking expectantly at Jack. There was something in the animal's gaze, a mixture of intelligence and gentleness, that deeply touched Jack. At that moment, Frank appeared at the door, ignoring his son's instructions to stay inside. "What a beautiful dog. He seems friendly, doesn't he?" Before Jack could respond, Frank was already beside the pit bull, petting its head with a naturalness that surprised his son. The dog, in turn, seemed absolutely delighted with the elderly man's attention. "Dad, be careful," Jack warned, still apprehensive. "We don't know anything about this dog." But Frank just smiled, a genuine smile that Jack hadn't seen in months. "Oh, son, don't worry. This one's a good boy, you can see it in his eyes." Observing the unusual scene, his father, usually confused and withdrawn, animatedly interacting with an unknown dog, Jack felt a wave of conflicting emotions. Concern, certainly, but also a spark of hope. There was something about this unexpected encounter that seemed right. "So, son?" Frank asked, his voice carrying an almost childlike excitement. "Can we keep him?" Jack looked from his father to the dog and back to his father. The decision he was about to make would change their lives in ways he couldn't even imagine. But at that moment, seeing the joy in Frank's eyes, he knew he had no choice. "We'll see, Dad," he replied, trying to sound cautious. "First, we need to check if he doesn't have an owner looking for him." But deep down, Jack already knew. This dog, by some quirk of fate, had found its way to them, and maybe, just maybe, it was exactly what they needed. The days that followed the pit bull's arrival were an emotional roller coaster for Jack. On one hand, he was amazed at the positive effect the animal had on his father. Frank seemed more animated. more present, almost as if the dog's presence had awakened a dormant part of his mind. On the other hand, Jack couldn't ignore the practical concerns that arose with the addition of a new family member. After checking with the neighbors and placing ads in the area, it became clear that the pit bull didn't have an owner looking for him. Jack decided to take him to the vet for a complete checkup, discovering that although a bit thin, the dog was healthy. "He must be between 3 and 4 years old," explained the veterinarian, Dr. Thompson, while examining the animal. "He's a male, not neutered. Have you thought of a name for him?" Jack looked at his father, who had accompanied the consultation with unusual interest. "What do you think, Dad? What name should we give him?" Frank furrowed his brow, thoughtful. For a moment, Jack feared his father was having one of his episodes of confusion. But then, Frank's eyes lit up. "How about Guardian? He seems like a true protector, doesn't he?" Jack smiled, surprised and moved by his father's lucidity. "Guardian? It's perfect, Dad." And so Guardian officially became part of the family. The adaptation wasn't easy. Jack had to reorganize the house routine to include the dog's needs. Regular walks, feeding, baths. But with each passing day, it became more evident that Guardian was exactly what they needed. One morning, about 2 weeks after Guardian's arrival, Jack woke up startled. Something was different. He could hear voices coming from the kitchen, his father's voice clearer and more animated than it had been in months, and Guardian's occasional barks. Intrigued, Jack got up and walked silently to the kitchen. The scene he found left him speechless. Frank, fully dressed and apparently in good spirits, was preparing breakfast. Guardian was sitting obediently by his side, looking expectantly at each movement of the elderly man. "Dad?" Jack called hesitantly. "What's going on? Are you okay?" Frank turned, a radiant smile on his face. "Good morning, son. I thought it would be nice to surprise you. Guardian woke me up early, so I thought I'd make breakfast. I remembered that pancake recipe your mother used to make." Jack stood paralyzed for a moment, struggling to process what he was seeing and hearing. His father was not only lucid, but had also remembered an old recipe, something that hadn't happened in a long time. "This is amazing, Dad," Jack finally managed to say, his voice choked with emotion. "Do you need help with anything?" No, everything's under control," Frank replied, flipping a pancake in the pan with surprising dexterity. "Why don't you take Guardian for a quick walk? When you get back, breakfast will be ready." Still dazed, Jack agreed. As he walked Guardian around the block, his mind was buzzing. It was as if a miracle had happened overnight. He knew he shouldn't get too excited. Alzheimer's was an unpredictable disease with ups and downs, but it was impossible not to feel a wave of hope. Back at the house, the aroma of fresh coffee and newly made pancakes greeted them. Frank had set the table with care, even including a plate with pieces of meat for Guardian. During breakfast, Jack watched in amazement as his father chatted animatedly, recalling stories from the past with a clarity he hadn't shown in months. Guardian, for his part, seemed to understand the importance of the moment, remaining quiet beside the table, his attentive eyes alternating between father and son. "You know, Jack," Frank said between bites, "I know I'm not always present, but I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you've been doing for me, and bringing Guardian into our family. It was the best decision we could have made." Jack felt a lump in his throat. "Dad, No, let me finish," Frank gently interrupted. "I know I'm not the man I used to be. There are days when I barely recognize my own reflection in the mirror. But since Guardian arrived, I feel like a part of me is awakening. It's as if he anchors me in the present, you understand?" Jack nodded, unable to speak. He understood perfectly. Over the past few days, he had noticed subtle but significant changes in his father's behavior. Frank seemed more alert, more engaged with the world around him, and all this thanks to a dog that had appeared out of nowhere in their lives. "Thank you, son," Frank continued, reaching out to hold Jack's hand, "for not giving up on me, for bringing Guardian into our lives, for being the wonderful son that you are." At that moment, sitting at the kitchen table with his father and their new canine companion, Jack felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Gratitude, love, hope, all mixed in a whirlwind that threatened to overflow. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Dad," Jack finally managed to say, his voice choked up, "for everything you've always done for me. We're in this together now, the three of us." Guardian, as if understanding the weight of the moment, let out a soft bark and rested his head on Frank's lap. The elderly man smiled, affectionately stroking the dog's ears. The rest of the morning passed in an almost magical atmosphere. Jack cancelled his classes for the day, deciding to make the most of this moment of lucidity from his father. They spent hours talking, remembering old stories, laughing at long-forgotten jokes. Guardian remained by their side the whole time, like a silent guardian of their moments of happiness. In the afternoon, they decided to take a walk around the neighborhood, something they hadn't done together in months. Frank walked slowly, leaning on Jack on one side and holding Guardian's leash on the other. Neighbors greeted them, surprised and happy to see Frank doing so well. As they walked, Jack couldn't help but think about how quickly life could change. Just a few weeks ago, he had felt overwhelmed, almost hopeless. Now, with Guardian by their side, he felt as if a new chapter was beginning. Back at home, exhausted but happy, they settled in the living room. Frank soon dozed off in his favorite armchair, Guardian faithfully lying at his feet. Jack watched them, his heart full of an emotion he could barely contain. That night, after helping his father to bed, Jack sat on the porch with Guardian. The stars shone brightly in the dark sky, as if celebrating this special day with them. "Thank you, buddy," Jack murmured, stroking the dog's head. "You have no idea how much good you're doing for us." Guardian looked at him with his intelligent eyes, as if he understood every word. At that moment, Jack knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Father, son, and their faithful guardian, united by bonds stronger than any adversity. The following weeks brought a new routine to Jack and Frank's home. Guardian integrated perfectly into the family, bringing renewed energy and a sense of purpose that had long been missing. However, life rarely follows a linear path, especially when dealing with a disease as unpredictable as Alzheimer's. One Saturday morning, Jack woke to the sound of agitated barking. Alarmed, he ran to the living room, finding Guardian in front of the open door, barking insistently. Jack's heart froze when he realized his father was nowhere to be found. "Dad!" called Jack, panic rising in his voice. "Dad, where are you?" Guardian continued barking, looking at Jack and then back to the street, as if trying to communicate something. Suddenly, Jack understood. "You know where he is, don't you, boy?" he asked, quickly grabbing Guardian's leash. "Come on, take me to him." Without hesitation, Guardian pulled Jack outside, guiding him through the neighborhood streets. The dog seemed to have a clear purpose, following an invisible trail with determination. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, they turned a corner and Jack spotted his father. Frank was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, looking around with a confused and frightened expression. He was wearing only his pajamas and slippers, shivering slightly in the cool morning air. "Dad!" Jack shouted, running towards him. "Thank God, you're okay!" Frank turned at the sound of his son's voice, tears of relief welling up in his eyes. "Jack, I don't know where I am. I thought I was going to work, but..." Jack hugged his father tightly, his heart still racing from the scare. "It's okay, Dad. We're going home." Guardian, sensing that his mission had been accomplished, wagged his tail and affectionately licked Frank's hand. The elderly man smiled weakly, petting the dog's head. "You found us, didn't you, buddy?" Frank murmured. "Good boy." Back at home, while helping his father warm up with a cup of tea, Jack couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if Guardian hadn't been there. The reality of the situation hit him with full force. As much as he wanted to believe things were getting better, his father's disease was still there, lurking, ready to manifest itself at the most unexpected moments. In the days that followed, Jack implemented new safety measures. He installed more secure locks on doors and windows, and even an alarm system that would alert him if someone left the house during the night. But his greatest security, he knew, was Guardian. The incident served as a painful reminder of the reality they faced, but it also highlighted the crucial role Guardian played in their lives. The dog seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to Frank, always alert and ready to help. One afternoon, as Jack was grading some of his students' papers, he heard an unusual sound coming from his father's room. As he approached, he saw something that left him speechless. Frank was having one of his agitation episodes common in Alzheimer's patients, but Guardian was there, his head gently resting on the elderly man's lap, offering silent comfort. Jack watched, amazed, as the dog's presence calmed his father. Gradually, Frank's breathing normalized, his hands stopped shaking, and an expression of peace took over his face. "How do you do that, huh, buddy?" Jack murmured to Guardian, who just looked at him with his wise eyes and wagged his tail. Intrigued by this special ability of guardians, Jack decided to research more on the subject. He discovered that there were training programs for assistance dogs specialized in helping people with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Although Guardian hadn't undergone any formal training, he seemed to have a natural gift for it. Motivated by this discovery, Jack began working more intensively with Guardian, reinforcing basic commands and introducing new tricks that could be useful in caring for Frank. The dog learned quickly, always eager to please and help. One day, while practicing a new command in the backyard, Jack noticed his father watching from the window, a genuine smile on his face. It was one of those rare and precious moments of total lucidity. "You know, son," Frank said when Jack came in, "seeing you with Guardian reminds me of when you were little and begged for a dog. Remember how I always said we didn't have the space or time?" Jack nodded, surprised by the sharpness of his father's memory. "Yes, I remember I was upset for a long time." Frank laughed softly. "And now look at us. Who would have thought that in the end it would be a dog that would bring us even closer together?" Those words touched Jack deeply. It was true. Guardian wasn't just a pet or a caregiver for Frank. He was the link that strengthened the bond between father and son, bringing moments of joy and connection, even on the most difficult days. As the days turned into weeks, Jack began to notice other subtle changes. The neighbors, who used to look with pity or avoid contact, now stopped to chat during walks with Guardian. Jack himself felt less isolated, finding a new circle of friendships among other dog owners in the local park. But perhaps the most significant change was in Jack himself. The constant weight of worry and stress began to diminish, replaced by a renewed resilience. Of course, there were still difficult days when Frank barely recognized where he was, days of frustrations and tears. But now, with Guardian by his side, Jack felt he could face any challenge. One night after putting Frank to bed, Jack sat on the porch with Guardian, as had become their habit. Looking at the stars, he reflected on how his life had changed in recent months. "You know, Guardian," he murmured, stroking the dog's ears, "when you showed up, I thought we would be saving you. But the truth is, you saved us." Guardian looked at him, his eyes full of understanding and unconditional love. At that moment, Jack felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost choked him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone on this journey. The future was still uncertain. Frank's disease would continue to progress, bringing new challenges and heartaches. But now, with Guardian as part of their family, Jack felt prepared to face whatever came. Together, father, son, and their faithful canine companion, they would find strength for the difficult days and joy in the precious moments they shared. Autumn arrived, painting the neighborhood streets with shades of red and gold. For Jack, Frank, and Guardian, the change of season brought new challenges and unexpected opportunities. One cool Saturday afternoon, as they were walking in the local park, something unusual happened. Guardian, normally calm and obedient, suddenly became alert, his ears perking up. Before Jack could react, the dog took off running, pulling the leash hard. "Guardian, come back here," shouted Jack, struggling to maintain balance while holding his father's arm. To his surprise, Guardian stopped just a few meters away, next to a woman sitting on a bench. The woman, middle-aged with graying hair, seemed to be having some sort of panic attack. Her hands were shaking, and she was breathing with difficulty. Guardian, with surprising gentleness, placed his head on the woman's lap, looking up at her with his understanding eyes. The effect was almost immediate. The woman's breathing began to calm, and she instinctively started petting the dog's head. Jack and Frank approached cautiously. "Ma'am, are you all right?" asked Jack, concerned. "I'm sorry about our dog. He doesn't usually do this." The woman looked up, a weak smile forming on her lips. "It's okay," she replied, her voice still shaky. "Actually, I think your dog just helped me a lot. I was having an anxiety attack and, well, he seems to have sensed that." Jack was impressed. It wasn't the first time Guardian had demonstrated an extraordinary sensitivity to human emotions, but seeing him help a stranger like this was something new. "I'm Emma," the woman introduced herself, her voice firmer now. "And who is this four-legged angel?" "This is Guardian," Frank answered, surprising Jack with his sudden lucidity. "And he really is an angel. He's been helping us a lot since he came into our lives." Emma looked curiously at father and son. You seem to have an interesting story to tell." In the minutes that followed, Jack and Frank shared a bit of their journey with Guardian. Emma listened attentively, her eyes lighting up with growing interest. "You know," she said when they finished, "I work as an occupational therapist, specializing in animal-assisted therapy. What you described about Guardian, it's exactly the kind of behavior we look for in therapy dogs." Jack felt a wave of excitement. "Therapy dogs? Do you think Guardian could—" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Absolutely. With proper training, Guardian could help many people, Alzheimer's patients like your father, but also people with anxiety, depression, even children with autism." The idea of Guardian helping other people, just as he had helped him and his father, deeply touched Jack. He looked at Frank, seeking his opinion. "What do you think, Dad? Do you think we could try this?" Frank smiled, his eyes shining with a clarity that had become rare in recent times. "I think it would be wonderful, son. Guardian has given us so much. It would be good to be able to share this gift with other people." In the weeks that followed, Jack and Guardian embarked on a new journey. With Emma's guidance, they began a training program to certify Guardian as an official therapy dog. The process wasn't easy. It required time, patience, and dedication. Jack had to balance Guardian's training with his work and caring for Frank. But with each small progress, with each new trick learned, the excitement grew. Frank, in turn, seemed to flourish with this new purpose. On his good days, he helped with the training, remembering commands and offering treats to Guardian. On bad days, just the dog's presence seemed to calm him, anchoring him in the present. One day, during a training session in the backyard, Jack noticed something extraordinary. Frank, who had spent the morning confused and agitated, suddenly seemed to transform. Watching Guardian perform a new trick, Frank's face lit up with a smile of pure delight. "Remember when you were little, Jack," he said, his voice laden with emotion. "You always wanted a dog. I said we didn't have the space, that it was too much responsibility. But look at us now." Jack felt tears forming in his eyes. It was moments like this, flashes of clarity and connection, that made all the struggle worthwhile. "It's true, Dad. Who would have thought we'd have to wait so long to make that dream come true?" Frank chuckled softly. "Sometimes, the best things in life come when we least expect them, like Guardian. Like you taking care of me." That night, after putting Frank to bed, Jack sat on the porch with Guardian, as had become their habit. Reflecting on his father's words, he realized how much his life had changed in recent months. What had begun as a lonely struggle to care for a father with Alzheimer's had transformed into something more. With Guardian, they weren't just caregiver and patient, but a united family facing challenges together. And now, with the prospect of Guardian becoming a therapy dog, it seemed that their small family unit was about to grow even more, touching the lives of other people who needed help. Guardian, as if sensing Jack's thoughts, rested his head on his knee, looking up at him with those eyes full of understanding. Jack smiled, stroking the dog's ears. "Thank you, buddy," he murmured, "for everything." As the night wore on, Jack allowed himself to dream about the future. He imagined Guardian bringing comfort to children in hospitals, calming elderly people in nursing homes, helping people with anxiety face their fears. And in each scenario, he saw his father, smiling with pride. Of course, the path ahead wouldn't be easy. Frank's disease would continue to progress, bringing new challenges. Guardian's training would require time and effort. Balancing all of this with his work and personal life would be a constant battle. But for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel overwhelmed by these concerns. Instead, he felt energized, full of purpose. Because now he knew he wasn't alone on this journey. He had his father in good times and bad. He had Guardian, a loyal companion and a constant source of comfort. And now, with this new adventure on the horizon, he felt they were about to become part of something bigger than themselves. As the stars shone in the night sky, Jack made a silent promise. No matter what the future held, they would face it together, father, son, and their faithful Guardian. And in the process, perhaps they could bring a little light and hope to the world around them. With this comforting thought, Jack stood up, calling Guardian inside. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of possibilities. And they were ready to face it, together. On a particularly cold winter morning, Jack woke to the sound of coughing coming from his father's room. Alarmed, he rushed to see what was happening. He found Frank sitting up in bed, his face pale and sweaty, struggling to breathe between fits of coughing. "Dad, what's wrong? Are you feeling something?" asked Jack, concern evident in his voice. Frank tried to respond, but another coughing fit prevented him. Guardian, who had followed Jack into the room, let out a low whine and jumped onto the bed, lying down next to Frank in a gesture of comfort. Without wasting time, Jack called an ambulance. The hours that followed were a blur of sirens, hospital corridors, and tense conversations with doctors. The diagnosis came as a shock: pneumonia, a particularly dangerous condition for the elderly, especially those with Alzheimer's. "We'll need to admit him," explained Dr. Stevens, the physician in charge. "The pneumonia is severe, and considering your father's condition, we need to monitor him closely." Jack nodded, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from under his feet. "Can I stay with him?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The doctor hesitated. "You can visit him during visiting hours, but—" "Doctor," Jack interrupted, "my father has Alzheimer's. He gets confused and scared in unfamiliar environments. Please let me stay with him." After a brief discussion, Dr. Stevens agreed to make an exception, allowing Jack to stay in the room with Frank outside of visiting hours. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. Frank oscillated between moments of lucidity and periods of total confusion. In his worst moments, he didn't recognize where he was or why he was there, calling for Jack even when he was right by his side. It was during one of these particularly difficult episodes that Jack had an idea. Taking advantage of a moment when Frank had finally fallen asleep, he called Emma, the occupational therapist they had met in the park. "Emma," he said as soon as she answered, "I need your help. It's about Guardian." After explaining the situation, Jack made his request. "I know Guardian hasn't completed his therapy dog training yet, but do you think there's any chance we could get permission for him to visit my dad in the hospital? I think it could really help." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Emma responded. "It won't be easy, Jack. There are a lot of regulations about animals in hospitals, but let me see what I can do." In the days that followed, while Frank fought against pneumonia, Emma moved mountains. She spoke with hospital administrators, presented studies on the benefits of animal-assisted therapy, and finally secured special authorization for a visit from Guardian. The day of the visit dawned cold but clear. Jack brought Guardian to the hospital, his heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and hope. As they entered the room, Frank was having one of his moments of confusion, muttering incoherently and pulling at the tubes and wires connected to him. But then, something magical happened. As soon as Guardian came into Frank's field of vision, the elderly man stopped. His eyes, previously vague and frightened, focused on the dog. A weak but genuine smile appeared on his face. "Guardian?" he called, his voice hoarse but clear. "Is that you, boy?" Guardian, as if understanding the importance of the moment, calmly approached the bed. Carefully, he rested his head on the mattress, allowing Frank to pet him. The effect was immediate and profound. Frank's agitation diminished, his breathing calmed, and for the first time in days he seemed truly present. "Jack," he called, turning to his son with a clarity he hadn't shown in a long time. "You brought Guardian." "Thank you, son." Jack felt tears welling up in his eyes. "Of course, Dad, he missed you." In the minutes that followed, something extraordinary happened. Frank began to converse. Not just disconnected or confused phrases, but a real conversation. He talked about how he missed home, about how kind the nurses were, about how proud he was of Jack for taking such good care of him. Dr. Stevens, who had stopped by to check on Frank, was astounded by the transformation. "This is remarkable," he murmured, observing the interaction between Frank and Guardian. "I've never seen anything like this before." Guardian's visit, although brief, had a lasting impact. In the days that followed, Frank showed significant improvement. His confusion decreased, he became more cooperative with treatments, and his physical condition began to improve more rapidly. Impressed with the results, Dr. Stevens authorized regular visits from Guardian. Each visit seemed to bring Frank more back to himself, anchoring him in the present and giving him strength to fight against the disease. For Jack, seeing his father's transformation was a deeply emotional experience. It was as if Guardian had found a key to a door they thought was permanently locked. One afternoon, while Frank napped with Guardian lying at the foot of his hospital bed, Jack had a revealing conversation with Emma, who had come to observe one of the sessions. "You know, Jack," she said, her voice soft but full of admiration, "what we're seeing here is really special. The connection between Guardian and your father. It's something rare and precious." Jack nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "He brought my father back to me," he said simply. Emma smiled, placing a comforting hand on Jack's shoulder. "And this is just the beginning. Think about how many other lives Guardian could touch in this way." At that moment, looking at his father sleeping peacefully with Guardian by his side, Jack felt a wave of gratitude and purpose wash over him. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had also discovered a strength they didn't know they possessed. And now, with Guardian by their side, it seemed they were on the threshold of something even greater. A chance not just to face their own struggles, but to make a real difference in the lives of others. Spring arrived, bringing with it not only the blossoming of flowers, but also a new phase in the lives of Jack, Frank, and Guardian. After weeks of recovery in the hospital, Frank finally received discharge, returning home with renewed strength and surprising determination. The impact of Guardian's visits during the hospitalization had been so significant that Dr. Stevens, impressed, decided to initiate a pilot program of animal-assisted therapy at the hospital. Emma, the occupational therapist, was invited to lead the project, and she didn't hesitate to invite Jack and Guardian to be part of this pioneering initiative. "It's an incredible opportunity," Emma explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm during a meeting at her clinic. "We could help so many people, Jack. Patients with Alzheimer's, children with autism, people dealing with depression and anxiety." Jack listened attentively, feeling a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The idea of Guardian helping other people as he had helped his father was exciting, but he couldn't help but worry about the practical implications. "I'd love to participate, Emma," he replied, hesitant. "But how am I going to balance this with my work at school and caring for my dad?" It was Frank, who had been sitting quietly until then, who surprised everyone with his response. "Son," he said, his voice firmer than it had been in months, "I think you should do this. I'm feeling much better now, and Mrs. Johnson can help me when you're not home. Besides," he added with a mischievous smile, "I think I can also lend a hand with Guardian's training." Jack looked at his father, moved. It was moments like this, of clarity and determination, that were becoming more frequent since Guardian's arrival in their lives. He realized he couldn't let this opportunity pass. "All right," he finally agreed, a smile spreading across his face. "Let's do this." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activities. Jack dove headfirst into advanced training with Guardian, learning specific techniques for working with different patient groups. Frank, true to his word, actively participated, often serving as a patient for Guardian to practice with. Guardian's progress was remarkable. He learned to recognize subtle signs of anxiety or agitation in people, to offer comfort without being intrusive, and even to perform simple tasks like bringing objects or pressing emergency buttons. In parallel, Jack worked with the administration of the school where he taught to adjust his schedule, allowing him to dedicate some afternoons each week to the hospital program. His colleagues and students, upon learning about the project, were incredibly supportive, some even offering to help with extra classes or activities for the students. Finally, the big day arrived. Guardian's first official visit as a certified therapy dog to the hospital. Jack was nervous, but Guardian's calm and confident presence beside him was reassuring. The first stop was in the pediatric ward. There, Guardian worked his magic with children facing long periods of hospitalization. He performed tricks that drew laughs from children who hadn't smiled in weeks, offered silent comfort to little patients frightened by medical procedures, and even motivated a little girl to take her first steps after surgery, walking slowly beside her down the hallway. Next, they visited the geriatric ward, where many patients struggled with loneliness and confusion. Just as Frank had done, Guardian's presence brought light to tired eyes, awakened long-forgotten memories in clouded minds, and offered a moment of peace and connection for those who felt isolated from the world. At the end of that first day, Jack was exhausted, but deeply moved. Seeing the impact Guardian had on so many lives in just a few hours, he felt they had found a new vocation. Returning home, Jack could hardly wait to tell Frank about the day. To his surprise, he found his father on the porch, lucid and eager for news. "So, how did it go?" Frank asked, his eyes shining with curiosity. Jack sat down next to his father, Guardian lying at their feet, and began to recount the events of the day. As he spoke, he noticed something extraordinary. Frank not only listened attentively, but asked pertinent questions, commented, and even gave suggestions for future visits. "You know, son," Frank said after Jack finished his account, "seeing you and Guardian making this difference in people's lives, it makes me feel like I'm contributing in some way too, as if, through you, I could continue doing something good in the world." Jack felt tears forming in his eyes. "Dad, you contribute more than you imagine. It was you who taught me about compassion, about caring for others, and it was you who had the courage to bring Guardian into our lives, even when I was hesitant." Frank smiled, reaching out to pet Guardian. "We make a good team, don't we? The three of us." At that moment, sitting on the porch under the starry spring sky, Jack felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. The challenges they faced, Frank's illness, the demands of the new project at the hospital balancing with his work at school, seemed less daunting when faced together. Guardian, as if sensing the importance of the moment, raised his head and looked at both of them, his eyes full of love and loyalty. Jack smiled, knowing that no matter what the future held, they would face it together, father, son, and their faithful Guardian. As the night wore on, Jack allowed himself to dream about the possibilities that lay ahead. The program at the hospital was just the beginning. Maybe one day they could expand the project to schools, nursing homes, rehabilitation centers. Who knows how many lives they could touch, how many people they could help. With Guardian by his side and the unwavering support of his father, Jack felt they were on the brink of something truly special. A journey that had begun with pain and uncertainty was transforming into a mission of hope and healing, not just for them, but for all those whose lives they would touch along the way. And so, under the mantle of the spring night, three hearts beat in unison, united by bonds of love, loyalty, and a shared purpose.